This is part 2 of Dr. Edward Edinger's portable Analytic Hour entitled Encounter with the Self, a Jungian commentary on William Blake's illustrations of the Book of Job. I'm resuming with picture 7. This picture shows the arrival of Job's comforters, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. These three represent shadow figures who are brought into conscious view with the breakdown of the ego. As Job loses the defensive boundaries of his conscious personality, repressed aspects of himself come into view. They at first do not speak. Job, the ego, first bewails his fate in the next picture. Picture 8. Job now succumbs to the nigredo, the dark night of the soul. He falls into blackness and suicidal despair. Quote, "May the day perish when I was born, and the night that told of a boy conceived. May that day be darkness. May God on high have no thought for it. May no light shine on it. Why did I not die newborn and perish as I left the womb? Why were there 2 knees to receive me, 2 breasts for me to suck? Had there not been, I should now be lying in peace, wrapped in a restful slumber, with the kings and high viziers of earth who build themselves vast vaults. Why give light to a man of grief? Why give life to those bitter of heart, who long for a death that never comes? Why make this gift of light to a man who does not see his way, whom God balks on every side?" Footnote, Job 3:23 from the Jerusalem Bible. Unquote. The ultimate questions have now been asked, and the rest of the drama will convey the implied answers, embedded in symbolic imagery. One might even say that these bitter questions were the contents of the vial poured on Job by Satan. At least these questions are a consequence of Job's being used as a chosen vessel to hold divine contents. Job has been confronted with the ultimate metaphysical questions of existence. Once these questions are constellated, the individual must respond in one of 3 ways. 1. In despair of finding himself an orphan in the cosmos, he may commit suicide either literally or psychologically. For example, by succumbing to cynicism. 2. He may find containment in a community or creed that provides an adequate religious myth to silence the questions that have been raised. 3. The third possibility is that a numinous encounter with the self may occur, through which the individual is granted a direct experience of the archetypal reality that underlies conscious existence. Such an event answers experientially the urgent questions that have been raised. Picture 9. Job's comforters are now talking to him. These figures can be best understood as personified images from the personal unconscious encountered in active imagination. Their remarks are a contaminated mixture of several elements of differing value, which are characteristic of active imagination and which call for an active, critical attitude on the part of the ego. The picture illustrates a particular speech of Eliphaz. Quote, "Now I have a secret revelation. A whisper has come to my ears. At the hour when dreams master the mind and slumber lies heavy on man, a shiver of horror ran through me, and my bones quaked with fear. A breath slid over my face. The hairs of my body bristled. Someone stood there. I could not see his face, but the form remained before me. Silence, and then I heard a voice. Was ever a man found blameless in the presence of God, or faultless in the presence of his Maker?" Footnote, Job 4:12-17. Going on, this must have been a numinous dream of Job's, which is being recalled in his active imagination. It is a kind of dream prelude to the later full encounter with Yahweh. Picture 10. In this picture, Job is the victim of a barrage of accusations from his so-called comforters. Since he is convinced of his innocence and unconscious of his shadow, the personal unconscious compensates by criticizing him. A good case can be made for the idea that Job is inflated and needs awareness of his shadow as provided by the criticism of his comforters. This type of reductive understanding is suitable for the young and promotes ego development while minimizing the importance of the unconscious. However, it misses the main point of the book of Job. It is essential that Job not succumb to the personalistic interpretations of his counselors. If he were to decide that his misfortunes were all his own fault, he would preclude the possibility of a manifestation of the numinosum. The ego vessel would be broken, would lose its integrity, and could have no divine manifestation poured into it. By holding fast to its own experience as an authentic center of being, the Job ego brings about the visible manifestation of the other, the transpersonal center. Picture 11. This picture illustrates Job's remark, quote, "If I say, quote, my bed will comfort me, my couch will soothe my pain, unquote, you frighten me with dreams and terrify me with visions." Yahweh's double nature is here portrayed in frightful fashion. He is entwined by a great snake, and a cloven hoof is visible. Yahweh's right hand points to the tablets of the law, and his left hand points to hell, which has opened up and threatens to engulf Job. Job here stares into the abyss, the negative numinosum. We are reminded by Jung's remark, quote, "The horrified perception of the reality of evil has led to at least as many conversions as the experiences of good," unquote. Whereas previously Satan had been associated with fire, now Yahweh himself has taken on that attribute and points to hell as one of his own manifestations. Recall the earlier quotation, "The Marriage of Heaven and Hell," where Blake says that the Jehovah of the Bible is no other than he who dwells in a flaming fire. Yahweh and Satan have now become one. As Jung tells us, one aspect of God is a seething lake of fire. To live by the book protects one from that fire, unless or until the satanic eye of Yahweh is activated and sets off another performance of the drama of Job. Footnote, Job 13:14, the Jerusalem Bible. Picture 12. Here a new man, a fourth one previously unmentioned, enters the picture, Elihu. A change of psychic atmosphere is indicated by the presence of stars for the first time. It is as though Job's encounter with the abyss had caused a change. The fourth figure signifies the emergence of Job's totality. Elihu is a young man who begins by saying, quote, "I am still young and you are old, so I was shy, afraid to tell you what I know. I told myself old age should speak. Advancing years will utter wisdom. But now I know that it is a breath in man, the inspirations of Shaddai, that gives discernment." Unquote. Job 32, 6-8 in the Jerusalem Bible. Elihu is the young and fresh aspect of the psyche, the child, that which is closest to the unconscious. It is this figure which is the harbinger of the self. Elihu's remarks present many of the same ideas that Yahweh will soon express more forcefully. Particularly noteworthy in Elihu's statements about dreams, quote, God speaks first in one way and then in another, but no one notices. He speaks by dreams and visions that come in the night, when slumber comes on mankind and men are all asleep in bed. Then it is he whispers in the ear of man, or may frighten him with fearful sights, to turn away from evil doing and make an end of his pride, to save his soul from the pit and his life from the pathway of Sheol. Job 35:14-18, the Jerusalem Bible. It is remarkable to discover in this ancient text a statement concerning the compensatory function of dreams. Picture 13. Now finally the full numinosum manifests. Yahweh appears to Job out of the whirlwind. Quote, "Who is this obscuring my designs with his empty-headed words? Brace yourself like a fighter. Now it is my turn to ask questions and yours to inform me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me, since you are so well informed. Who decided the dimensions of it? Do you know? Or stretched the measuring line across it? What supports its pillars at their bases? Who laid its cornerstone when all the stars of the morning were singing with joy, and the sons of God in chorus were chanting praise? Who pent up the sea behind closed doors when it leapt tumultuous out of the womb? When I wrapped it in a robe of mist and made black clouds its swaddling bands. When I marked the bounds it was not to cross, and made it fast with a bolted gate. Come thus far, I said, and no farther. Here your proud waves shall break." Unquote. The distinction between the ego and the self is here presented with stunning force. Job is discovering the autonomy of the psyche. Wind that blows where it will always carries that symbolism. However, the way that Yahweh addresses Job greatly augments the latter's importance. Jung writes, quote, "Job is challenged as though he himself were a god, but in the contemporary metaphysics, there was no other god except Satan. In his stead, God must set up his miserable servant as a bugbear whom he has to fight. The conflict becomes acute for Yahweh as a result of a new factor. The new factor is something that has never occurred before in the history of the world. The unheard of fact that, without knowing it or wanting it, a mortal man is raised by his moral behavior above the stars in heaven, from which position of advantage he can behold the back of Yahweh, the abysmal world of shards." Unquote. Footnote: Jung, Answer to Job, paragraphs 594 and 595. We might ask, what does Jung mean by Job's moral behavior? I think he refers to Job's refusal to accept responsibility for events that he knows he did not cause, Job's intellectual honesty, his loyalty to his own perception of reality, his integrity in maintaining the distinction between subject and object, between man and God. All these go to make up Job's moral behavior, which has forced God to reveal himself. Job's encounter with Yahweh in the whirlwind taught him a basic lesson. In his innocence, like Orthodox theologians of all creeds, Job has assumed that God's reality must correspond to his conception of it. The living experience shatters that assumption. Picture 14. The numinous experience continues in a more structured form. At first, Yahweh had appeared as an undifferentiated energy phenomenon, the whirlwind. Now, in this picture, a structured universe is revealed in an image of totality. In the heavenly realm, we see a numerical series of 1, 2, 4, represented by Yahweh as 1, Apollo and Artemis as 2, and the 4 angels as 4. Even more important is the fact that this is an image of creation. In the margin are quotations from the story of creation in Genesis. Let there be light. Let there be a firmament. Let the waters be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And God made 2 great lights. Let the waters bring forth abundantly. Let the earth bring forth cattle and creeping things and beasts. It is most interesting that an image of world creation should appear at this point. I am reminded of a passage in the alchemical Emerald Tablet of Hermes. At the end of the recipe comes the phrase, quote, "Thus the world has been created," unquote. The alchemist considered the creation of the philosopher's stone, the goal of the opus, as equivalent to the creation of the world. Job's torturous ordeal, analogous to the ordeal imposed on the prima materia in the alchemical vessel, in each case, out of the ordeal, a world is born. It is as though Job's encounter with Yahweh in his raw, undifferentiated form were a conception, a process of fertilization that brings about a new creation. The alchemists spoke of the prima materia as an increatium, matter that had not yet undergone the process of creation. Job's encounter with Yahweh in his uncreated form seems to have the effect of initiating a new creation. This corresponds to the effects we observe when the ego meets the unconscious, the undifferentiated prima materia of the psyche. A process of creative differentiation often ensues, which amounts to a regeneration of the personality. This happens in the case of Job. Footnote: Jung, Psychology and Alchemy, Collected Works, Volume 12, paragraph 430. Picture 15. Here we have the infernal and chthonic aspects of the numinosum as behemoth and leviathan. This is the other side of the numinosum, which we must always remember as a union of opposites. In the previous picture, Job was below, looking up at creation as manifested in the heavens. In this picture, he is above, surrounded by stars, looking down at the inhabitants of the abyss. He has temporarily risen above his biological being and is looking down at it. Yahweh is saying, quote, "Behold behemoth, which I made as I made you. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook, or press down his tongue with a cord?" Job 40:15 and 41:1. Job is being shown the abysmal aspect of God and the depths of his own psyche, which contains devouring monsters remote from human values. Behemoth and Leviathan represent the primordial concupiscence of being. God reveals his own shadow side, and since man participates in God as the ground of his being, he must likewise share his darkness. This illustrates the fact that our existence is based on protoplasm, greedy, lusting, devouring matter. Jung writes, quote, "Formerly Job was naive, dreaming perhaps of a good God or of a benevolent ruler and just judge. He had imagined that a covenant was a legal matter, and that anyone who was party to a contract could insist on his rights as agreed, that God would be faithful and true, or at least just, and as one could assume from the 10 Commandments, would have such recognition of ethical values, or at least feel committed to his own legal standpoint. But to his horror, he has discovered that Yahweh is not human, but in certain aspects less than human, that he is just what Yahweh himself says of Leviathan, the crocodile. Quote, "He beholds everything that is high. He is king over all proud beasts." Job 41:25. Unconsciousness was an animal nature. Like all old gods, Yahweh has his animal symbolism with its unmistakable borrowings from the much older theriomorphic gods of Egypt, especially Horus and his 4 sons. Of the 4 animals of Yahweh, only one has a human face. That is probably Satan, the godfather of man as a spiritual being. Ezekiel's vision attributes 3/4 animal nature and only 1/4 human nature to the animal deity, while the upper deity, the one above the sapphire throne, merely had the likeness of a man. This symbolism explains Yahweh's behavior, which, from the human point of view, is so intolerable. It is the behavior of an unconscious being who cannot be judged morally. Yahweh is a phenomenon, as Job says, not a man. Footnote, Answer to Job, paragraphs 599 and 600. Picture 16. This picture comes not from the book of Job, but rather illustrates a remark of Jesus. Quote, "I watched Satan fall like lightning from the heavens." Luke 10:18, the Jerusalem Bible. It is very interesting that Blake should follow his portrayal of the encounter between Job and Yahweh with a picture of Satan's being cast out of heaven as witnessed by Jesus. According to Jung, Yahweh became aware of his lack of moral differentiation through meeting Job, and therefore had to give satisfaction to Job by incarnating in Christ. This involved at the same time a decisive separation of Yahweh and Satan, represented by Satan's being cast out of heaven. Jung notes that Satan had little effect on the events of the incarnation and continues, quote, "His comparative ineffectiveness can be explained on the one hand by the careful preparations for the divine birth, and on the other hand by a curious metaphysical phenomenon which Christ witnessed. He saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. In this vision, a metaphysical event has become temporal. It indicates the historic and, so far as we know, final separation of Yahweh from his dark son. Satan is banished from heaven and no longer has any opportunity to inveigle his Father into dubious undertakings. This event may well explain why he plays such an inferior role wherever he appears in the history of the Incarnation. His role here is in no way comparable to his former confidential relationship to Yahweh. He has obviously forfeited the paternal affection and been exiled. His punishment, which we missed in the story of Job, has at last caught up with him, though in a strangely limited form. Although he is banished from the heavenly court, he has kept his dominion over the sublunary world. He is not cast directly into hell, but upon earth. Only at the end of time shall he be locked up and made permanently ineffective." Unquote. Footnote, Jung, Answer to Job, paragraph 650. Continuing on, Blake does not follow the New Testament account precisely. In this picture, Satan is being cast into hell, indicating that, according to the Christian framework, we are seeing an eschatological event at the end of time. Psychologically, it indicates a decisive separation of the opposites. A division is occurring between Yahweh and Satan, and between Job and his shadow figures. A full synthesis has not been achieved, but rather a higher level of differentiation. Picture 17. Job's relation to Yahweh has now been healed. The ego's rapport with the self, the ego-self axis, has been restored. In the lower margin, Blake quotes the saying of Christ in John 14:20. At that day ye shall know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. Unquote. This quotation states explicitly that Job is reconciled to Yahweh through Christ. The same point that Jung makes in answer to Job. In other words, Yahweh's encounter with Job has required him, Yahweh, to undergo the Christian transformation. This will be the new world that Blake portrayed in picture 14. Although Job is reinstated in Yahweh's good graces, all elements of the personality do not share in the restoration. Job's friends have their backs to Yahweh and seem to be banished from his blessing. This indicates that the shadow remains in repression and full integration remains for the future. The image of the light and dark sides having their backs to each other is reminiscent of Jacob Boehm's split mandala, which Jung refers to in a study of the process of individuation. Both Boehm and Blake were extreme introverted intuitive types who were one-sidedly spiritual with very little relation to the reality of the senses. Blake's lack of integration of the earthy shadow side probably accounts for the lack of a fully developed mandala in this series. Also, he led a life compensatory to his time, which was extroverted, rational, and sensation reality-oriented. The collective worldview of Blake's time would therefore have been his shadow, personified by Newton and Bacon. Footnote: The Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, Collected Works 9, Volume 1, paragraph 534. Here's Boehm's back-to-back mandala. Picture 18. This picture illustrates the attitude brought about by Job's encounter with Yahweh. He is facing inward and offering a burnt sacrifice to Yahweh. What is pictured here is thus a sacrificial attitude. Jung's subtle and profound interpretation of this, expressed throughout Answer to Job, is paraphrased by Rivka Kluger. Quote, in his final speech, God reveals himself to Job in all his frightfulness. It is as if he said to Job, look, that's what I am like. That is why I treated you like this. Through the suffering which he inflicted upon Job out of his own nature, God has come to this self-knowledge and admits, as it were, his knowledge of his frightfulness to Job. And that is what redeems the man Job. This is really the solution of the enigma of Job, that is, a true justification of Job's fate, which, without this background, would, in its cruelty and injustice, remain an open problem. Job appears here clearly as a sacrifice, but also as the carrier of the divine fate, and that gives meaning to his suffering and liberation to his soul. Unquote. Job is a sacrifice for Yahweh's developing consciousness. At first, he is an involuntary victim. After the theophany, when he sees the reality of Yahweh with his own eyes, he takes on the attitude of a voluntary sacrifice. Quote, I had heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees thee. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Footnote, Job 42, 5 through 6. Job's comforters are no longer separated from him. The sacrificial attitude brings unity to the personality of the ego. Shadow figures and wife anima turn toward the center, which they serve and which unites them. Picture 19. The book of Job concludes with these words, quote, Yahweh restored Job's fortunes because he had prayed for his friends. More than that, Yahweh gave him double what he had before, and all his brothers and all his sisters and all his friends of former times came to see him and sat down at table with him. They showed him every sympathy and comforted him for all the evils Yahweh had inflicted on him. Each of them gave him a silver coin, and each a gold ring. Yahweh blessed Job's fortune even more than his first one. He came to own 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-donkeys. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. His first daughter he called Turtle Dove, his second Cassia, and his third Mascara. Throughout the land there were no women as beautiful as the daughters of Job, and their father gave them inheritance rights like their brothers. After his trials, Job lived on until he was 140 years old and saw his children and his children's children up to the 4th generation. Then Job died, an old man and full of days. Footnote, Job 42, 10 through 17. The picture shows his family and friends each bringing him money and a gold ring. This expresses the unification of the personality. Money signifies libido, and this is now becoming available to the ego from all the various aspects of the psyche. A ring signifies unity, wholeness, and the marriage pledge. That is, it is an emblem of the conjunctio, the union of opposites in the psyche. A field of ripe grain is in the background. The fruits of the ordeal are now to be harvested. Job's fortunes have not only been restored, but there has also been an enlargement of the personality as a result of the encounter with the numinosum. As Jung puts it, the widening consciousness is at first upheaval and darkness, then a broadening out of man to the whole man. Footnote, Jung, Mysterium Conjunctionis, Collected Works 14, paragraph 209. Picture 20. Here Job is instructing his daughters. Scenes of his encounter with Yahweh are in the background. It is interesting that the feminine factor is given special prominence at the end. The 3 daughters are named, mentioned as particularly beautiful, and given equal inheritance rights, something very unusual for the time. Clearly, the one-sided patriarchy of the book has been superseded as a consequence of Job's ordeal, and the feminine principle has come into proper prominence. In the picture of sacrifice, Job faced inward. Now he faces outward, using the experience of his ordeal as the basis for instruction of others. Job's newly established relations to his daughters corresponds to what Jung says happened to Yahweh after his encounter with Job. He remembered his playmate Sophia, a feminine being who is no less agreeable to him than to man, a friend and playmate from the beginning of the world. Yahweh had treated Job in a shockingly unrelated way. His feminine side had been missing and must be recovered, as it is here with Job. Footnote, Jung, Answer to Job, paragraph 617. See also Proverbs 8, where wisdom, Sophia, speaks. Then I was by him as one brought up with him. Picture 21. The final picture shows Job, his wife, and new family gathered around the tree of life once again under new and different circumstances. It is dawn. The sun is rising on the right. On the left is the moon in its waxing phase. Previously all had been sitting. Now they are standing. The animals are awake instead of asleep, and the musical instruments are being played. A rejuvenation of life is represented following the Nicaea, the dark night of Job's encounter with the unconscious. He is now in a conscious relation to the reality of the self, Yahweh, to instinctual energies, the animals, and to the spiritual, creative, and feeling factors, the musical instruments. And most important of all, Job is now aware of being the carrier of the divine fate, and that gives meaning to his suffering and liberation to his soul. As in the first picture, here again is the flaming sacrificial altar. Again, the picture is framed by the cloud of smoke rising from that altar, and again a tent-like form surrounds them all, as though the picture were a window looking into the holy tabernacle. The lesson of the Job story for modern man is described by Jung in his letter of June 30, 1956, to Leonid Kochnig, who had asked for an answer to the problem of an unconscious, ignorant creator God. Jung replies, quote, "We have become participants of the divine life, and we have to assume a new responsibility. The continuation of the divine self-realization, which expresses itself in the task of our individuation. Individuation does not only mean that man has become truly human as distinct from animal, but that he has become partially divine as well. This means practically that he becomes adult, responsible for his existence, knowing that he does not only depend on God, but that God also depends on man. Man's relation to God probably has to undergo a certain important change. Instead of propitiating praise to an unpredictable king or the child's prayer to a loving father, the responsible living and fulfilling of the divine will in us will be our form of worship of and commerce with God. His goodness means grace and light, his dark side the terrible temptation of power. Although the divine incarnation is a cosmic and absolute event, it only manifests empirically in those relatively few individuals capable of enough consciousness to make ethical decisions, i.e., to decide for the good. Therefore, God can be called good only inasmuch as he is able to manifest his goodness in individuals. His moral quality depends upon individuals. That is why he incarnates. Individuation and individual existence are indispensable for the transformation of God the Creator. Footnote: C.G. Jung Letters, Volume 2, page 312, footnote. At the end, there's a small image, the mythological phoenix, symbol of transformation. Publisher's note: Encounter with the Self is a companion volume to Edward F. Edinger's The Creation of Consciousness, Jung's Myth for Modern Man, title number 14 in this series published by Inner City Books. The Creation of Consciousness is comprised of 4 long essays using religious and alchemical texts, mythology, modern dreams, and the concepts of depth psychology. The author proposes nothing less than a new worldview, a creative collaboration between the scientific pursuit of knowledge and the religious search for meaning. Religion is based on eros, science on logos, writes Dr. Edinger. Religion sought linkage with God. Science sought knowledge. The age now dawning seeks linked knowledge. The first essay traces the outlines of a new myth, emerging from the life and work of C.G. Jung, not another religion in competition with all the others, but rather a psychological standpoint from which to understand and verify the essential meaning of every religion. The second essay discusses the purpose of human life and what it means to be conscious, knowing together with an other. In religious terms, the other is God. Psychologically, it is the self, archetype of wholeness, and the regulating center of the psyche. The third essay examines at length the implications of Jung's masterwork, Answer to Job, in which Jung demonstrates that God needs man in order to become conscious of his dark side. Depth psychology, the new dispensation, finds man's relation to what has traditionally been called God in the individual's experience of the unconscious. The final essay explores Jung's belief that God's moral quality depends on individuals, which translates psychologically into the pressing need for man to become more conscious of his own dark, destructive side, as well as his creative potential. The Creation of Consciousness is an important book, written in the shadow of ominous global forces. Its basic focus on the quality and meaning of individual human lives reflects an underlying concern for the continuation on Earth of any life at all. And once again, I'll show you the cover of The Creation of Consciousness by Edward Edinger, published by Inner City Books. This has been a reading of Encounter with the Self, a Jungian commentary on William Blake's illustrations of the Book of Job, which Dr. Edinger referred to as his portable Analytic Hour. I urge you to purchase a copy and keep it with you.